Tehran, February 28, 2026. The morning call to prayer has just finished echoing across the rooftops of the Iranian capital. The city is barely awake. And then the sky tears open. Wave after wave of precision strikes hit a compound in the heart of the city. Buildings collapse. Communications go dark across the entire country simultaneously. Iran's military radar blinded. Iran's command networks severed. And in a building that the world did not know was his location that morning, the man who had led the Islamic Republic for nearly 4 decades, the supreme religious and political authority of 89 million people, the most powerful Shia cleric on earth, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, is struck and killed. By nightfall, the Iranian government confirms what it calls the martyrdom of the supreme leader of the Islamic Revolution, killed in a joint attack by the United States of America and the State of Israel. 40 days of national mourning are announced. Across the Muslim world, from Baghdad to Karachi to Istanbul, people pour into the streets in grief and in fury. At the United Nations, the Secretary General condemns the strikes as a violation of all norms of international law. Russia, China, Belarus, Bangladesh, and dozens of other nations send condemnations. And in Washington, the President of the United States posts a message on social media celebrating the killing. But here is what you have not been told. The operation that ended the life of Ayatollah Khamenei was not a battlefield decision made in the heat of a military confrontation. It was planned. It was coordinated at the highest levels of 2 governments. It relied on intelligence gathered over years. It involves cyber warfare, satellite surveillance, space-based communications, blackouts, and the deliberate targeting of a head of state, something that international law has prohibited since the post-World War II order was established. And at the center of it all was one piece of intelligence gathered at the last moment that moved the entire timeline forward by hours and sealed the fate of a man who had survived assassination attempts, wars, sanctions, and 70 years of political struggle. What really happened on that morning? Who gave the order? How was the location confirmed? And what does this killing mean, not just for Iran, but for the international order, for the Muslim world, and for every sovereign nation on earth that now understands its leaders can be targeted and killed from the air by powers that have decided the rules do not apply to them? Stay right here. Drop a comment right now. Where are you watching from, and what time is it where you are? And if this kind of deep, independent, unfiltered investigation is what you come to Spy Shadows for, hit subscribe right now so you never miss another one. Give this video a like and share it with someone who deserves to know the full truth, because tonight we are not telling you the version that Washington wants you to hear. We are telling you what actually happened. To understand the full weight of what happened on February 28, 2026, you have to understand who Ayatollah Ali Khamenei was. Not the caricature version manufactured by decades of Western media framing. Not the cartoon villain of American political speeches. The real man, his origins, his beliefs, his significance to hundreds of millions of people across the Muslim world, and the role he played in one of the most consequential political projects of the 20th century. Ali Hosseini Khamenei was born on April 19, 1939. In Mashhad, one of the holiest cities in Shia Islam, home to the shrine of Imam Ali al-Rida, the 8th of the 12 Imams revered by Shia Muslims as divinely guided successors to the Prophet Muhammad. He was the second of 7 children born into a deeply religious, scholarly family. His father was a theologian. From the age of 4, he was studying the Quran. By the time most children are finishing primary school, he had already begun his formal religious education at the seminaries of Mashhad, one of the most ancient centers of Islamic learning in the world. As a young man, he traveled to Najaf, arguably the most sacred city in all of Shia Islam, the burial place of Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib himself, the cousin and son-in-law of the Prophet and the first of the 12 Imams. He then moved to Qom, the intellectual and clerical heartland of Iranian Shia scholarship, where he came under the direct influence of a teacher who would change not only his life but the history of an entire nation. Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini. Khomeini was 19 years old when he first attended Khomeini's classes. He later said, repeatedly throughout his life, that those years left an indelible mark on everything he thought, believed, and became. What Khomeini gave him was not merely religious scholarship, it was a revolutionary theological framework, the concept of Aliyati Faqih, the guardianship of the Islamic jurist, which argued that Muslim clerics did not simply have the right, but the religious obligation to govern society in the absence of the hidden imam. This was not a passive theology. It was a call to action. Khomeini embraced it completely. From 1962 onward, Khamenei was an active participant in the revolutionary movement against the Shah of Iran, the monarchy that had been reinstated to absolute power through a CIA and British intelligence coup in 1953 that overthrew Iran's democratically elected Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh. This history is not incidental to understanding Khamenei, it is foundational. The political consciousness of a generation of Iranian revolutionaries, including Khamenei, was formed in direct response to watching a foreign intelligence service destroy their country's democracy in order to protect Western oil interests. The anti-American, anti-imperialist ideology that Khamenei would champion for the rest of his life did not come from nowhere. It came from 1953. It came from watching what the CIA did to Iran. He was arrested by the Shah's secret police multiple times. He was tortured, according to his own memoirs. He was imprisoned, exiled, and returned. In 1979, when the Islamic Revolution swept the Shah from power and Khomeini returned from exile in France to lead the new Islamic Republic, Khomeini was among the inner circle appointed to the Revolutionary Council, then made Deputy Minister of Defense, then Khomeini's personal representative on the Supreme Defense Council, then briefly commander of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, then elected as Tehran's Friday Prayer Imam, a position of profound political and spiritual significance in revolutionary Iran, which he held and cherished for the rest of his life. In 1981, while leading Friday prayers in Tehran, he survived a bomb hidden in a tape recorder that exploded and destroyed his right arm, permanently paralyzing it. He survived. He continued. He was elected president of Iran that same year, then re-elected in 1985. Presiding over Iran during the devastating 8-year war with Iraq, a war in which Saddam Hussein, backed militarily by the United States, used chemical weapons against Iranian soldiers and civilians, killing hundreds of thousands of people while the Western world looked the other way. When Ayatollah Khomeini died in June 1989, the Assembly of Experts convened to choose his successor. The deliberations settled on Khomeini despite his own expressed reservations. "I believe I do not deserve this position," he said at the time. "Perhaps you and I know this. This would be symbolic leadership, not real leadership." The Assembly voted for him anyway, and his leadership, as history records, was anything but symbolic. For 37 years, Khomeini shaped the Islamic Republic with a hand of extraordinary reach. He oversaw foreign policy. He commanded the military. He controlled the judiciary. He guided the development of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps into one of the most powerful military and political institutions in the Middle East. He built and sustained the Axis of Resistance, the strategic alliance of Iran, Hezbollah in Lebanon, Iraqi militias, the Houthi movement in Yemen, and Palestinian armed groups that fundamentally reshaped the regional balance of power and forced both Israel and the United States to recalibrate their Middle Eastern strategies in ways they had never anticipated. He championed Iran's civilian nuclear program while issuing a formal religious decree, a fatwa, explicitly prohibiting the production of nuclear weapons, a fatwa that international nuclear inspectors confirmed Iran was adhering to. He presided over Iran's transformation into what he called an energy superpower. He kept Iran functioning as a sovereign state through decades of the most comprehensive economic sanctions ever imposed on any nation in modern history. Sanctions designed explicitly to collapse the Iranian economy and force political capitulation. Sanctions that failed to achieve either goal. To the hundreds of millions of Shia Muslims across the world in Iran, Iraq, Lebanon, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, and beyond, he was not simply a political figure. He was the Wali al-Faqih, the guardian of the jurist, the highest living religious authority of their faith. His rulings carried religious weight. His declarations shaped the spiritual and political lives of his followers in ways that have no precise parallel in Western political experience. When he spoke, people listened not just as citizens listening to a head of state, but as believers receiving religious guidance. He was a man of deep contradictions, a committed revolutionary who had been tortured by a US-backed regime, a religious scholar who transformed a concept of passive theological waiting into active political governance, a figure who inspired profound devotion among his followers and profound opposition among millions of Iranians who felt his rule had denied them the freedoms they deserved. He was all of these things. He cannot be reduced to any single one of them. And on the morning of February 28, 2026, 86 years old, he was killed by missiles fired from Israeli aircraft guided by American intelligence while sitting in a building in his own capital city. In his own country, which no foreign power had invaded and which had not struck first against either of the nations that killed him. This is the man the world lost that morning. Whatever your politics, whatever your faith, whatever your view of his governance or his ideology, the killing of a head of state, a supreme religious leader, a figure of this magnitude by a foreign military operation conducted without any United Nations authorization and in clear violation of every principle of international law demands to be understood in its full weight. And that weight is enormous. The operation that killed Ayatollah Khamenei on February 28, 2026 did not happen spontaneously. It was not an improvised strike in the chaos of an escalating military confrontation. It was the product of months of planning, years of intelligence accumulation, and a last-minute piece of information provided by American intelligence that changed the timing of the entire operation and ensured that Khamenei would be precisely where Israeli aircraft needed him to be. To understand the full operational picture, you have to go back several months before the strike itself. The relationship between the United States and Israel had been escalating toward a major confrontation with Iran for years, accelerating dramatically after the Gaza War of 2023 and 2024 after Hezbollah's involvement in that conflict. After Iran's direct missile exchanges with Israel in 2024 and after Israel's so-called 12-day war with Iran, in June 2025, a conflict during which Israel struck multiple Iranian nuclear facilities and Iran struck back with ballistic missiles targeting Israeli cities. That conflict ended without either side achieving a decisive resolution, and both Washington and Tel Aviv emerged from it, determined that the arrest round would be final. Through late 2025 and into early 2026, a mass protest movement inside Iran, triggered by catastrophic economic conditions, fuel shortages, and the suppression of political freedoms, gave Washington and Tel Aviv a political context into which they framed the planned military operation. When Iranian security forces suppressed the protests with extreme violence in January 2026, resulting in thousands of deaths that shocked the international community, the narrative architecture for what was to come was effectively constructed. The military campaign that would follow was framed as an operation to liberate the Iranian people from a repressive regime, even as it killed hundreds of civilians in strikes across 24 provinces. On the operational side, the planning was meticulous. Israel had been tracking potential locations of senior Iranian leadership for months, building a targeting picture through satellite surveillance, signals intelligence, human sources within Iran, and the intelligence infrastructure that both the CIA and Israel's own agencies had developed through years of covert operations inside the country. The challenge was not identifying who to target. The challenge was knowing where Khamenei would be at any given moment. A man who, according to all public accounts, maintained extraordinary operational security around his movements. never traveled abroad during his entire 37 years as supreme leader, and varied his locations and routines with the specific awareness that he had been a target of assassination planning for decades. Israeli and American planners had originally intended to execute the operation at night, using the cover of darkness as they had done during Koros. And night required, night choir. Awareness, my night lastines, my larness course. Awareness that he had been a target. A thin he said. Israeli and American, my leston Israeli. Izefte, Khalid, you have to see. I carefully see it, it's a prose. It's like by my sellers. With it's a cut, but why I complicit. So ride it, plowy it's a kite, it's unso will licit. God it's a saka, it's a sitakai, it's sick, to kas it, it's sick to clay, you I said to weep it, it's zit to gagleaks, it's to seats. They de sit the kakit the deck. Previous strikes on Iranian facilities. The plan was ready. The aircraft were loaded. The timing was set. Then the CIA delivered something that changed everything. American intelligence gathered through signals collection, satellite imagery analysis, sources whose precise nature has not been publicly confirmed, pinpointed the location of a gathering of Iran's most senior military and security leadership, including individuals who were at the apex of the country's entire command structure. The intelligence indicated that Khamenei was in the immediate vicinity of this gathering, in a separate building within the same compound. This information did not wait for nightfall. The decision was made to move immediately in the morning hours of Saturday, February 28th. The timing changed. The operation moved forward. The execution was simultaneous across multiple axes. American Cyber Command and American Space Command moved first, their role confirmed publicly by the United States Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff in the briefing given after the operation. The cyber and space components did what no kinetic strike could do alone. They blinded Iran. Communications networks were disrupted. Radar systems were degraded. Iran's ability to see what was coming, to communicate internally, to coordinate a response, all of it severed in the opening seconds of the operation. Iran's military was effectively deaf, blind, and mute before the first missile arrived. Into that created vacuum, Israeli aircraft struck. The compound was hit. The building where senior military commanders had gathered was destroyed. And the separate building where Khamenei was located, the building that the CIA's last-minute intelligence had identified, was struck directly. Satellite imagery confirmed severe damage to the structure within hours. Iranian state media initially reported that the supreme leader was alive and continuing to command. Iran's foreign minister, speaking to international media, said he was alive as far as he knew. Iranian news agencies reported that Khamenei was steadfast and firm. The regime's instinct in the first hours was denial, the same instinct that governs any government facing a catastrophic blow. Then, as the hours passed and the reality became undeniable, the confirmation came. Iranian state media, the official voice of the Islamic Republic, announced that His Eminence, Grand Ayatollah Imam Sayyid Ali Khamenei, leader of the Islamic Revolution, had been martyred in the joint attack launched by America and the Zionist regime. 40 days of mourning were declared for the Iranian nation. The IRGC issued a statement of condolences and vowed what it called a hard, decisive, and regret-inducing punishment on those responsible. The same strikes that killed Khamenei also killed multiple members of his immediate family inside the compound: his daughter, his son-in-law, a grandchild, and a daughter-in-law. Days later, it was confirmed that his wife had also died from injuries sustained in the strikes. An entire family killed together in a building that foreign aircraft destroyed from thousands of feet above. The strikes did not stop with the compound. On the same morning, across 24 provinces of Iran, Israeli aircraft struck targets, including military installations, infrastructure, and in an act that drew specific and furious condemnation from the international community, to schools. In the southern city of Minab, a girls' elementary school was struck, killing over 100 children. These were not military targets. There is no military justification for striking a school full of children. The Iranian Red Crescent reported at least 201 people killed in the strikes across the country that day, a figure that did not yet include the hundreds more who would die in subsequent operations. The geopolitical response was immediate and seismic. Russia's president condemned what he described as a cynical violation of all norms of human morality and international law. China condemned the killing. The United Nations Secretary-General condemned the strikes and called for an immediate return to negotiations. Bangladesh described the assassination as a violation of international law and norms. Belarus called it treacherous. Afghanistan's foreign minister denounced the aggression against Iran. Pakistan saw protests outside the American consulate in Karachi that turned violent, with demonstrators expressing their fury at the killing of a supreme religious figure of their faith. In Turkey, thousands gathered outside the Israeli consulate in mourning and protest. In Iraq, demonstrators massed near the entrance to the Green Zone. And in Washington, the President of the United States wrote a post on his social media platform stating that Khamenei had been killed, and followed it by telling the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps to lay down their arms or face certain death, and instructing the Iranian people to take over their government. This is not the language of international law. This is not the language of diplomacy. This is not even the language of war between states that recognize each other's sovereignty and rights. It is the language of a power that has decided, openly and without apology, that the rules of the international order, the rules established after the catastrophe of World War II, precisely to prevent powerful states from doing exactly this, no longer apply to it. When Ayatollah Khamenei died in June 1989, millions of Iranians poured into the streets of Tehran in a wave of grief so intense, so overwhelming, that the funeral had to be halted when crowds surged and dozens of mourners were crushed in the chaos of their own devotion. The body had to be airlifted by helicopter because it was physically impossible to move it through the mass of weeping humanity that surrounded it on foot. What happened after Khamenei's killing on February 28, 2026 was different, more complex, more fractured, more reflective of the contradictions that had defined his rule. And in those contradictions lies one of the most important truths about what his death means and what comes next. Inside Iran, the response was divided in ways that told the story of 37 years of governance more honestly than any political analysis could. In Tehran and in cities across the country, genuine mourners wept and beat their chests in the tradition of Shia lamentation, clutching portraits of the man they had revered as the supreme guardian of their revolution and their faith. Black-draped crowds gathered at mosques. The atmosphere was heavy with grief and disbelief. A nation that had watched its supreme leader survive war, assassination attempts, sanctions, and decades of confrontation suddenly confronting the reality that he was gone. For those who had organized their entire spiritual and political worldview around him and around the institution of the Islamic Republic, it was a moment of profound rupture. At the same time, and this must be understood honestly, without using it to justify what was done, there were Iranians who did not mourn. In the coastal city of Shahsavar, in parts of Isfahan, in neighborhoods of Tehran itself, where the January massacre was still raw and the memory of thousands of protesters killed by state forces was still bleeding. In these places, people lit cigarettes with pictures of Khamenei. They honked their horns. They toppled monuments. They said in their grief and in their exhaustion and in their years of suppressed fury that they were not crying for this man. These were not celebrations manufactured by foreign media. They were the authentic expressions of a population that had lived under a system that had killed its own people when they asked for change, that had imprisoned its own journalists, that had tortured its own dissidents, that had denied its own young people the future they deserved. Both of these realities are true simultaneously. Both must be held together if you want to understand Iran. And neither of them justifies what was done. Because here's the critical point that the triumphalist narrative of Washington and Tel Aviv deliberately obscures. The right of a population to change its own government through its own struggle is not the same thing as a foreign military operation killing a head of state from the air. These are not equivalent. They are not the same category of event. One is an act of self-determination. The other is an act of assassination by a foreign power, and it sets a precedent of extraordinary and terrifying reach. The international condemnation came from a remarkable breadth of governments spanning every political alignment. Russia's Vladimir Putin, in a formal condolence message to the Iranian president, condemned what he called a cynical violation of all norms of human morality and international law. China's foreign ministry condemned the killing and expressed its condolences to the Iranian people. The United Nations Secretary-General Antonio Guterres condemned the strikes and called for an immediate return to negotiations to pull the region and the world back from what he described as the brink. The Shanghai Cooperation Organization flew its flags at half-mast. The Iranian flag at the Iranian consulate in Shanghai was lowered in mourning. From the global south, the response was near-unanimous condemnation. Bangladesh, a democratic Muslim-majority nation with no particular ideological alignment with Tehran, stated directly that the assassination was a violation of international law and international norms. Afghanistan condemned the aggression. Belarus called it treacherous. Azerbaijan's president offered condolences and described Khamenei's death as a great loss for Iran. These were not statements of ideological solidarity with the Islamic Republic. They were statements of principle from nations that understood that if a head of state can be killed in this way today, with no accountability and no legal framework, then no head of state is safe tomorrow. Across the Muslim world, the killing of a supreme religious authority, one of the most senior living Shia clerics on earth, a figure who commanded the spiritual allegiance of hundreds of millions of believers, landed with a particular weight that non-Muslim observers struggled to fully grasp. In Karachi, furious protesters stormed and damaged the American consulate. In Baghdad, crowds massed at the entrance to the American-controlled Green Zone. In Istanbul, thousands gathered in mourning and protest outside the Israeli consulate, holding pictures of the dead leader and demanding accountability from governments that had enabled or endorsed the killing. In Lebanon, Hezbollah declared mourning and vowed response. In Yemen, the Houthi movement pledged escalation. In Iraq, Shia militia commanders issued statements of fury. The IRGC itself announced strikes on 27 bases hosting American forces across the region, as well as Israeli military facilities. Explosions were reported in Qatar and the United Arab Emirates. Security alerts were activated across multiple countries simultaneously. The Middle East was not destabilizing. It had destabilized overnight, in a way that no serious analyst believed could be reversed quickly or easily. And in the halls of the United Nations, a debate began, one that will continue for years, about what the killing of Ayatollah Khamenei means for the SERV, international legal order that was constructed after World War II. The UN Charter prohibits the use of force against the territorial integrity and political independence of any state. International humanitarian law prohibits the deliberate targeting of heads of state absent a formal state of war declared through proper international channels. The Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court defines assassination of a foreign leader in circumstances like these as a potential war crime. These are not abstract legal formulations. They are the foundations of the system that prevents the world from collapsing into a condition where every powerful nation can kill the leaders of weaker nations whenever it finds those leaders inconvenient. What happened on February 28, 2026? The killing of Ayatollah Khamenei by American intelligence and Israeli aircraft did not happen in a legal vacuum. It happened in a world that has a system of laws and institutions specifically designed to prevent exactly this. Those laws and institutions were not consulted. They were not even mentioned by the governments that carried out the operation. They were simply bypassed. And the precedent that creates the message it sends to every government and every people on Earth is one of the most significant and most dangerous developments in international affairs in this century. The funeral for Ayatollah Khamenei, when it came, drew an enormous gathering. An interim leadership council was announced. President Mossad Assassinated, Chief Justice Ghulam Hossein Mohsenichi, and senior cleric Alireza Arafi. The IRGC declared it was in the final stages of choosing a permanent new Supreme Leader, a process whose outcome will shape the trajectory of Iran and the broader Middle East for a generation. Khamenei's own son, Mojtaba, deeply connected to both the IRGC and the besieged paramilitary force, emerged as one of the most discussed potential successors, though the clerical establishment has traditionally resisted the dynasticism that father-to-son succession would represent. What is certain is that whoever emerges as the next supreme leader of Iran will do so in a context shaped entirely by what happened on February 28th. The next leader will have watched the most powerful man in his country killed from the air by a foreign military. He will have watched Khamenei's family killed alongside him. He will have watched the international community's condemnation amount to nothing in practical terms. He will be choosing the path of a nation that has been struck at its very core, and whose military, the IRGC, is demanding both swift succession and swift revenge. The idea that killing Khamenei would liberalize Iran would cause the Iranian people to rise up and embrace the governments that killed their supreme leader was always a fantasy. The fantasy of people who understood nothing about Iranian history, nothing about Shia Islam, nothing about what national sovereignty means to a people who watched a CIA coup in 1953 destroy their democracy and a foreign-backed war in the 1980s kill hundreds of thousands of their children. Iran will not become a Western-aligned liberal democracy because Khamenei was assassinated from the air. History does not work that way. Populations do not embrace the powers that bomb their countries and kill their leaders. What the killing of Ayatollah Khamenei has done is create a wound, deep, generational, and potentially permanent, in the relationship between Iran and the nations that carried out this act, and between those nations and much of the broader Muslim world. Iran has replaced its supreme leader exactly once in its entire history. When Ayatollah Khamenei died in June 1989, the transition to Khamenei happened within a single day. The Assembly of Experts convened and voted within hours. There was no interregnum. There was no power vacuum. The institutional machinery worked with a speed that surprised even those who had designed it. The transition that must now happen is incomparably more difficult. The first transition happened in peacetime, at the end of a war, in a country whose territory was intact and whose government was functioning. The current transition is happening in the middle of an active military confrontation, with American and Israeli strikes continuing across the country, with the government's communications infrastructure disrupted, with senior military commanders killed in the same operation that killed the supreme leader, and with the Assembly of Experts, the body constitutionally mandated to choose the next leader, unable to safely convene in a country that is being bombed. Chatham House's director of the Middle East and North Africa program put it precisely. The Assembly cannot risk further death and damage to the institution. They cannot gather in an open session with aircraft targeting senior figures of the Islamic Republic. The process of choosing a permanent successor will take weeks at minimum, and possibly months, and during all of that time, the Interim Council of Three will hold power in conditions of extraordinary danger and complexity. The three members of that council, President Mossad Assassinated, who is regarded as a relative moderate, Chief Justice Ghulam Hossein Mohsenichi, who is a hardliner, and senior cleric Alireza Arafi, representing the Guardian Council, will have to navigate the most acute crisis in the history of the Islamic Republic while simultaneously managing the IRGC, which has pledged revenge strikes and is insisting on a rapid succession process. The tensions between the reform-oriented and conservative factions of the Iranian government do not disappear because the supreme leader has been killed. They intensify. Every decision the Interim Council makes will be contested by one side or the other. Every move toward negotiation or de-escalation will be attacked by IRGC hardliners as betrayal. Every move toward escalation risks catastrophic consequences for a country already under military assault. The question of succession itself is one of the most fraught in modern Islamic political history. The two most discussed figures are Mojtaba Khamenei, the dead leader's son, deeply embedded in the IRGC and Basij command structures. A figure with genuine institutional power, but whose elevation would break the anti-dynasticism that has been a foundational principle of the Islamic Republic since 1979, and Alireza Arafi, who sits on the interim council itself, and who has the advantage of being positioned at the center of the current governance structure, with the ability, noted by CNN's analysis, to effectively vet his own candidacy as a member of the Guardian Council. Beyond Iran's borders, the death of Khamenei sends a shockwave through the entire architecture of the axis of resistance that he spent 3 decades building and sustaining. Hezbollah in Lebanon, already severely weakened by the 2024 and 2025 conflicts, now faces the question of whether the new supreme leader will maintain the same level of ideological and material commitment to their cause that Khamenei always provided. The Iraqi Shia militias, who drew their organizational framework and much of their ideological inspiration from Khamenei's revolutionary model, face the same question. The Houthi movement in Yemen, which has been striking Israeli and American targets in the Red Sea in solidarity with Palestinian resistance, faces the same question. The axis of resistance was not a bureaucratic institution with self-sustaining rules and processes. It was held together by a combination of material support, ideological vision, and the personal religious authority of the Wali al-Faqih himself. Khamenei was not merely funding these groups. For their members and commanders, his religious authority was part of the justification for their entire struggle. His fatwa, his blessing. His ideological framework gave what they did a theological legitimacy in the world of Shia political Islam. A new supreme leader, whoever he is, will need time to establish that authority. And in that interval, the coherence of the axis of resistance is genuinely uncertain. For the Palestinian cause specifically, which Khamenei championed vocally and materially for the entirety of his leadership, his death raises questions that Palestinians themselves have asked publicly. Iran under Khamenei provided financial, military, and logistical support to Hamas and to Palestinian Islamic Jihad. Whether a successor, navigating an existential internal crisis, will maintain that commitment at the same level is genuinely unknown. And the Palestinian people, already living under the most devastating military assault in their modern history, now face the possibility of losing one of their most consistent and most powerful state supporters. The legal reckoning, if it comes, will be slow and will face enormous political obstruction. The International Criminal Court has jurisdiction over acts of this nature when they meet the threshold of war crimes or crimes against humanity. The international legal mechanisms designed to govern exactly this kind of situation exists. Whether they will be invoked against the two most powerful military actors in the world is a different question entirely. And the honest answer is that the mechanisms of international accountability were built in a world that assumed great powers would face at least some legal risk. That assumption is now under severe pressure. What is already happening, what cannot be stopped and will not be reversed, is a fundamental shift in how the world's non-Western nations understand the international order. The killing of Ayatollah Khamenei has confirmed for governments from Beijing to Islamabad to Ankara to Pretoria what many of them have long suspected: that the rules-based international order that the United States and its allies champion in their speeches is applied selectively, enforced selectively, and abandoned entirely when its application would constrain the actions of those same powers. A head of state was killed. A supreme religious figure was killed. His family was killed alongside him. Hundreds of civilians were killed in strikes across 24 provinces, including children in their school. No UN authorization was sought. No declaration of war was made. No international legal process was followed. And the nations that did it publicly celebrated and dared others to respond. The world that exists after February 28, 2026 is different from the world that existed before it. Not because Ayatollah Khamenei was a perfect leader, he was not, and the Iranian people who suffered under his rule know this better than anyone. But because the act of killing him in this way, without law, without authorization, without accountability, has broken something in the architecture of international order that will not easily be repaired. Mashhad, where Khamenei was born in 1939, is the city of the shrine of the 8th Imam. Shia Muslims believe that this Imam was martyred, poisoned by the Abbasid Caliph, who feared his growing influence. The word martyrdom has a specific theological meaning in Shia Islam. It means death at the hands of the unjust, in the service of a cause greater than oneself. Whether or not you share that theology, whether or not you agreed with Khamenei's politics or his governance, the framing that Iranian state media chose in announcing his death is one that will resonate powerfully and permanently through the Shia Muslim world. He was called martyr from the moment his death was confirmed. That word will follow his memory. It will shape how he is remembered. It will shape for years, perhaps for generations, how the people who loved him, feared him, followed him, and mourned him understand what was done to him and by whom and why and what it demands in response. The shadow war between Iran and its enemies did not end on February 28, 2026. It entered a new and far more dangerous phase. The man at the center of the resistance architecture for nearly 4 decades is gone. But the forces he organized, the ideology he championed, the resentments he understood and embodied, and the hatred of foreign domination that formed the foundation of his entire political life, none of that died with him. History is not made by single deaths, however dramatic and however significant. It is made by the systems, the ideas, and the grievances that outlast any individual. And on the morning of February 28, 2026, the United States of America and the State of Israel did not end an era. They ignited one. We started tonight over the rooftops of Tehran as the sky tore open. We end here in the aftermath of one of the most consequential acts of targeted state violence in modern history. A supreme leader is dead. Our family is dead. Children in a school are dead. And the world that comes next, for Iran, for the Muslim world, for the international order, is one that none of us fully understands yet. This story is not over. The succession, the retaliation, the legal reckoning, the future of the axis of resistance. That is the next investigation. And you do not want to miss it. Hit subscribe so you are there when it drops. Give this video a like if it told you something tonight that you needed to hear. And share it because this is the version of events that deserves to be heard. This is Spy Shadows. We will see you in the next one.